Okay.
Nigel Wright,
Yes,
welcome to
indeed.
another live
Yes,
stream.
indeed. I am Nigel Wright, Voice CEO and Gratitude Champion, and welcome to Voice CEO Conversations, where we talk to leaders about walking the talk and paying the cost to be the boss of their own voice. I am joined with none other than the one wheeling Mr. Hello Future, CEO of attn.live, Mr. Ian Utile. Day
Cheers,
four.
everybody.
Day four.
Cheers.
I got my water.
I steep my coffee like it's tea. This is
Really?
a local company, Steep Coffee. My friend launched and been very involved with them, and yay for Steep Coffee. And this mug keeps this coffee very, very warm. So I could come back to it like 3 hours later and still burn my mouth.
I'm all for very hot coffee. Scalding is my...
As it should be. As it should be. We've all heard some bad things about lukewarm people, lukewarm beverages. So here we are. Today will be a good conversation. I'm ready.
All right. So far, I'm just going to give people a really quick recap. We talked about the origin story. We talked about being human. Yesterday, we had a really good one. We talked about accountability in voice tech, NLP, and AI, and that was good. I had some strong opinions on that. And today, I'm just as excited because this is another one that I think we're both very interested in, and I'm super happy to talk to you about, which is the difference between voice equity and voice ownership. And I'm not going to belabor it. I'm going to jump right in and pounce, if you would, to get this started. Okay, so voice equity. This is something that just in terms of voice CEO conversations in general, was something that was always interesting to me. And I feel like equity is something that's super important, and owning your voice and making sure you get your say and you get to be the person you are. So my question to you very specifically is, do you believe there's voice equity right now in the following categories? Voice equity being human, and that's really, and speak on voice diversity in that capacity, voice equity in the tech industry, and in the voice tech industry, and then voice equity in terms of brand. How does that feel to you?
Well, maybe what would help me to answer that appropriately, why don't you give me a high-level answer to those, and then I'll expound and make sure that we're on this. Okay. We're talking about the same thing, please.
Right. So for me, voice equity really, I think it's more something that you have to demand more than it's given or universally or ubiquitously available. I don't think it's just naturally there for you to take advantage of. I think you have to really work in that space currently. I think there is the possibility of that becoming more difficult with the introduction of AI and the decision makers in the AI space. Because what happens is with the processing of a lot of data, people tend to, I think it just feels like it is gravitating more to, I'm going to look at this data set and I'm going to say, oh, these 3 points were hit, this must be the answer. And that's not actually the case. I don't think you really know until you ask the question. So as far as voice equity, in humans, I don't think there's enough voice diversity, to be honest, especially when you start adding the voice space and the brand space. I don't think there's enough. And I think it's because we're not asking enough questions. And the other reason I think there's not enough is because I think we're still too focused on conforming. There's a heavy tax for non-conformance, and I think we're buying into that too heavily instead of just letting ourselves be ourselves, understanding there's no one right way. There's really just right for you. I mean, be appropriate and respectful and things like that. But the bottom line is, the more we start to conform, the less diversity we're putting out into the space. And I think that's necessary. So that's what I think about, voice equity. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you think about the words equity versus ownership, let's start with that. My dad is the owner of his construction company, New Habitat. Right. He owns it. He has all the equity. It's his and his alone. Every company I've ever started,
I've been an equity holder because I've given equity, not total ownership, but equity to my co-founders and our founding members of our team.
Okay.
So I think when it comes to voice equity, we're talking about it's a shared ownership. So we're talking about shared ownership amongst all voices, maybe of a room on Clubhouse, maybe of a podcast with multiple hosts and a very diverse listener base, maybe of all the Amazon Lexi users or all of the Apple Siri users, compared to ownership, right? Like Amazon owns the Lexi software. Google owns the assistant software. There's no equity outside of Amazon and Google having shareholders without any sort of say.
Right.
So when it comes to equity on a personal level, I think it's important for an individual human, whether representing themselves as a man or woman, or whether representing an organization as the face or the voice of an organization. Do you want to own your voice? Own everything it is that you say. Take total responsibility for it. Be the one that creates an audience, creates influence, creates attention. It's all on your shoulders. Voice, ownership. Do you not want to use anybody else's platforms? No social media sites. You want to do it all on your own? Or are you going to find different softwares, hardwares, communities, and platforms that you can have equity in your voice, but also know that others are also participating with your voice? So part of it is a lens by which we each see the world. What do you think?
You know, that's a really good view of it. I think where I struggle is when that equity is great if you have a true partnership, particularly a strategic partnership. You and I are doing these calls together over the 8 days. I think that's a strategic partnership. We both have interest in it for our own reasons and joint reasons and things of that nature. But I feel like there are circumstances where I think the need for equity as opposed to ownership becomes exploited. And it's whether by acquiescing into letting everybody else take care of it, being too adverse to doing, as I say, doing the damn work, which is required, and or just people just taking advantage. And that's where I struggle. And I'm gonna send it back to you and say, as a startup founder many times over and an owner of a company who's dealt with equity a lot. How do you balance that? And I think we'll close it out with that. How do you balance, how do you find the proper balance of that?
Well, I'm different than a lot of people in that my dad is my hero. Very fortunate for that.
Right.
Therefore, my dad's belief around business and partnerships and how you treat people has a huge impact on me. My dad always taught me, never try to win. Never try to beat somebody. Never try to get the good deal and take advantage of someone or an organization. He believed in always trying to create win-win scenarios. And he always felt confident that everybody could walk away from an agreement where everyone felt great about it. That's not always the case. And he said, when it's not the case, it's in your best interest to not demand that you win, but to allow the other person to win. So the way that I've treated equity has been, I have often given people what they could earn and become worthy of, rather than give them just the least amount of equity I can, for instance, in a company. As far as an analogy for us to use, think of voice ownership as you own a car. You pay the insurance, you bought the car outright, or you pay payments, you pay for the gas, any wear and tear happens to the car, you pay the mechanic bill, you own the car, it's your car. You have a pink slip on it. So he wants to buy that car, they got to buy the car and make the transfer. Compared to Uber. Uber is transportation equity. because that car has been made available to a community of people that have all said, I will participate financially by giving Uber some money, then a lot of the money goes to the driver. I will participate in this equity pool where this vehicle and this driver will take me from point A to point B. And so that is a model of equity, community, kind of using this vehicle, even though it's owned by somebody, compared to ownership. And I think that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to voice communities and voice platforms, do we actually want total ownership? Or do we like the idea of a collaborative environment where everybody brings the best of who they are? And then the question comes down to equality and diversity. What can we do to have different genders, different ethnicities, different ages represented in this community so that it doesn't all look and sound the same? And Nigel, with that, I'll hand it off to you to maybe let people
and
know.
I'm going to close this out. Yeah, I'm going to close this out quickly. I have a saying. There's no boss in collaboration. There's only winning, which lends itself to what you said. I would love to hear what everybody thinks about voice equity, voice ownership, and voice diversity. So please weigh in. We would love to hear from you. And in closing, I want to thank you first and foremost. And I want to remind everybody that our voice is our passport and conversation is our currency. I am Nigel Wright, Voice CEO, Gratitude Champion, and I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow.